morning. I'll begin with some revision. Can you hear her at the back? Okay, you need to project your voice. We began with 1989. 1989 is the time of the end. And everything is built from the time of the end. It's here that God begins to open light to his people. And the light that God begins to open up is all based upon that first increase in 1989. And this was reform lines. It's reform lines that began to open up to God's people. What is a reform line? We talk about line upon line. It's the methodology that we recognize in this movement. But this is a special type of line. It's a reform line, which means a line of reformation. So what does it mean to reform something? It means to change it, to correct it, to restore it. So it's in a bad state, and you're going to remold it into a good state. So I can be living badly, and then I decide to reform my ways, and I leave behind my bad habits, and I start behaving properly. It means to abandon that which is corrupt and return to a good state. So, through all the definitions, it means to take something that already exists, but it's not in a good way. And you're going to work with it, to mold it, to reform, which means to pull it into a new type of form. And this form will be good. So we talk about reform. And we come to a reform line. And it's not just any line over any line. A reform line is when God is going to take his people and he's going to take them from a bad condition into a good condition. And he has a particular method to do this. We have 4 reform lines when God deals with Israel. There are other stories which will give us information, but there are 4 reform lines that specifically relate to Israel. Israel is in captivity to Egypt. God is going to raise up a deliverer and restore Israel. Israel is in captivity to Rome. God is going to raise up a deliverer, and restore Israel. In this history, at the end of ancient Israel, they can learn about this from this beginning history. So God's people living here, they know that Moses delivered them. They know that God raised up Moses to free them from Egypt. And there's the promise, a king is coming who's going to restore. So what are they expecting here? John comes and he says, Moses freed you from Egypt. A deliverer will free you from Rome. And what does everyone expect? A mighty man who will defeat the Romans. Just as the Pharaoh was killed in the Red Sea. They're waiting for a new Moses to kill Caesar. Doesn't that sound reasonable? All of the passages are saying Israel's about to be restored. And all their expectations of what this looks like are twisted because they don't understand what? Literal and spiritual. So they take the writings of their prophet and they twist them. They think it's a thus saith the Lord. John the Baptist rises up and teaches the same thing. Everyone's expecting a new Moses to rise up and kill Caesar. It's the natural conclusion. We come to modern Israel. God's people have been in captivity to Egypt and to Rome. Beginning of modern Israel. God's people have been in captivity for 1260 years. God draws them out. They have a prophet, Ellen White. Then you have all these good Adventists. Don't you think that if the Jews had a wrong understanding of what this looked like, maybe Adventists have a wrong understanding of what this looks like? And those Jews claim to use the writings of Moses to justify this king that's going to kill Caesar. And these Adventists use Ellen White to describe this reform line, and particularly the work of the second and third angel, and the Sunday law crisis. They did not understand literal and spiritual. They thought kill Pharaoh, killing Pharaoh equals killing Caesar. The church has the same problem. They don't understand literal and spiritual. And as Elder Parminder has been teaching, they're going to manipulate the writings of the prophet to justify their understanding of what the end of modern Israel looks like. Many Adventists understand that their church is in trouble, but they can't understand why. They can't give a proper, detailed answer of what the root of the problem is. Many Adventists not in this movement, they can see that the condition of ancient Israel before Christ is the same condition as the church today. Many people can see that. Reform Adventists can see that. But they never reason from cause to effect. They never go the next step and think, if the Pharisees did not understand this history because they were not reading the writings of the prophet correctly, maybe Adventists in this history are also not reading the writings of the prophet correctly. They can't reason from cause to effect. And it gets worse. The problem of the Jews expecting this king to kill Caesar became the problem of the movement. Became the teaching of John the Baptist. We have the same problem. The misunderstandings of the Millerites by the Adventists have become the misunderstandings of this movement. John taught a king who will kill Caesar. Adventists teach, Elder Jeff teaches, an understanding of the dragon, the beast, and the false prophet. An understanding of the Sunday law. John misunderstood the nature of the kingdom. Elder Jeff misunderstood the nature of the kingdom. Do we need to stop? You told me to stop. So these reform lines, they were already warning us from the time of the end. If we hadn't been open to hearing, they were already telling us, Jews and Adventists do not understand correctly this history. And these aren't those liberals. It's the Pharisees who are waiting for the king. The conservative Adventists that are waiting for the Sunday law. right from the time of the end. Everything we need is in them. So yesterday we started to break them down. We first constructed our line. 144,000 and priests. And then we looked at the Levites, the Nethinims, and the 144,000. 4 harvests. One after another. Beginning with the first fruit. The first call to the church. A second call to the church. And then a call to the world. This is the loud cry. We make 3 calls. 2 to the church. 1 to the world. And then the 144,000. 4 harvests. So we went back to our reform lines. I made the claim that no one would have ever left this movement if they understood or believed in reform lines. Everything that you need to know where to belong, who to believe, and how to act are all demonstrated in those 4 reform lines. We constructed this pattern. We have the history of the beginning and end of ancient Israel. They demonstrate the beginning and the end of modern Israel. We discussed this first history. We referred to Leviticus 26. They're told there's blessings or curses. If you do what God tells you to do, you're blessed. If you don't, you're cursed. Did they receive the blessings or the cursings? Cursings. So you know they did not behave properly towards the end of this history, and they failed in their mission. So we said, this is the Alpha beginning history, and it's failure. Then we went to the Omega history, end of ancient Israel. And what are they meant to do? Take the gospel to the world. Do they do that? Yes. That is success. Here they fail. Here they succeed. If they had have succeeded here, this space was not necessary. They would never have had a king. They would never have gone to Babylon. Those things would never have happened. You would not have needed this space. But because this fails, they go into a Laodicean condition. A new history must begin. That will complete the work. This is success. It's the end of ancient Israel, and it's our primary witness for understanding the end of modern Israel. It's the exact same pattern. They have a job description. Proclaim the coming of God. The imminent second advent. The second advent that's right in front of them. They get so far. Christ is meant to come back here. But they fail. They go into the Laodicean condition. If they had have succeeded, this would have been the second advent. No need for this history. If they had have succeeded, this could have been first advent. No need for this history. But they failed. So we have captivity and a new reform line. So our chief witness is the line of Christ. So we did this quite specifically. We didn't draw the whole lines of the second and third group. Because I want us to be focused on a particular point, which doesn't really relate to them. Whenever God calls a movement, He begins by raising up a messenger who we write on his forehead, first angel. In each one of these histories, Moses, John, William Miller, Elder Jeff Pippinger. Always a messenger raised up at the time of the end. So we took the primary history. The history of Christ is really easy to see. People have done different things with this reform line over the years. They place the cross in different places. For example, they might place the cross here. What's the problem? Here, we go to the world. Gospel is no longer restricted to Adventism. So if you place the cross here, the disciples are scattered in this history. How can they be giving the loud cry? After the cross, no disciple was giving the loud cry. No one was going back to the church, let alone to the Gentiles. So if we want to be honest, we have to take the whole of the line and see where it fits. This way, Mark, we go to the world, the third group. In 34 AD, they go to the Gentiles, the third group. Prior to 34 AD, there are two calls into the church. The second of those happened at Pentecost. And who gave the call at Pentecost? The disciples. Because there was a group that had gone through a full history of training under two people, one after the other. John the Baptist, Jesus Christ, who we can label First angel, second angel. So a first group is trained under two leaders, one after the other. They're trained. They go through a time of trouble, a time of test. Some of them don't make it. One of them dies. When they have sorted out their problems, they go back to the church at Pentecost, then to the world at 34 AD. So the line of Christ fits perfectly. And you cannot move any element. From the arrival of the first angel to the arrival of the second angel to the empowerment of the second angel at the first temple cleansing. John knew that when Christ was working, he needed to decrease and then die. And he submitted to that. John died before the cross. In this history, before the testing of the first group. Then we come to modern Israel. This Millerite history. We acknowledge there's differences between the beginning and the end. There has to be differences. God is not reforming in the same fashion. Protestants were not Israel. Protestants were not of the same nature as Adventists. Without going into it, we understand Protestants become Babylon. Adventists never do that. So we've always made that distinction. But a consequence of this difference between the beginning and the end history is that we do not see the same structures identically. So with the history of the Millerites, time of the end, messenger raised up, then we can mark a test, the arrival of the second angel, but also a tarrying time. They're taking all of this from the 10 virgins. The 10 virgins are not telling the story of priests and Levites. It's all the story of one group. So from 1798 to October 22, this is one fractal. One group, symbolized by 10 virgins. They tarry, and then the cry is raised at Boston. This is the second angel empowered. Christ had been seen before. Christ had been seen. He existed in this history. People had visibly seen him. But he hadn't yet taken over leadership of the movement. He does that here. Samuel Snow had been seen. He was visible. He was already teaching. but he hadn't yet taken over leadership of the movement. He does that here. Boston, Concord, Exeter. Swelling of the midnight cry. Test, October 22. And you know that's a fractal because if this is a shut door, they're going back to the world in 1850. So Daniel 12:1 has not come yet. There's no point crying to people after Daniel 12:1. So October 22 has to be a fractal. It's one group of people, the first, and before their test, you find a transition in leadership. Joshua, he was vice president to Moses. In this history, between the Red Sea and when the leadership changes, he was visible. Everyone knew who Joshua was. If they were willing, they could see him. Everyone knew who Snow was. If they were willing, they could see him. Everyone could see Jesus from the baptism. They could inquire. He's related to John. Everyone knows who he is. Even the Pharisees know who he is. They know that 12-year-old boy who spoke to them in the temple. They know enough to attack his family and where he comes from. Everyone knows who he is. The second leader is visible in this history. They take over leadership here, all before the shut door of the first group. So you can know that before November 9, 2019, based on the foundational principle study of this movement, there had to be a leadership change. There had to be 2 sets of disciples. And that leader had to be visible in this history. Everyone had to know, not that he was the second leader, but they had to know his name. We have 3 witnesses for that. Everyone consistent. 2 sets of disciples. And we said at the beginning, what's the problem of John? He's taking the Laodicean ideas of this history and he blends them with his message. They killed Pharaoh, we will kill Caesar. And Christ has to come, and his most difficult problem is convincing his disciples that John taught them error. That John taught them incorrect methodology. that John taught them a wrong understanding of his work. The greatest obstacle this movement faces, particularly in this history, just prior to the shut door and soon after, is convincing people that Elder Jeff taught you wrong concepts and wrong methodology. That's the work of the second angel. So the study Elder Paminda shared this morning should give you confirmation of who he is, and that this movement is led by God, because God allowed the mistakes of John. He allowed the mistakes of Elder Jeff, but he expects us 31 years later to know better, to not hold on to Laodicean concepts. So we constructed the change of leadership. We went to ancient Israel, saw the birth of Moses. He has misunderstandings of the nature of the kingdom. He thinks he can win it by force, kill the Egyptians in Egypt. So there are things he does not understand. He understands at the burning bush that he must take the people out. They cross the Red Sea, which is held back by an east wind, lighting up with 9/11. The foundations are laid, an understanding of the law. There's a tarrying time. In the midst of frustrations with his people, with rebellious people in his movement, what mistake does he make? He strikes the rock. And the rock represents who? Christ, the second angel. So he's facing complaints and rebellion in his movement. In the middle of this, instead of attacking the people who are rebellious to him, he strikes the rock. And what comes out of the rock? Water. A message. Our reform line. In the middle of the growing rebellion, path of the just, the first great separation this movement faced. Instead of seeing who his enemies truly were, instead of striking them down, he strikes the rock that had done nothing to hurt him. He attacked the second angel, Elder Paminda. So he left Path of the Just alone, and he attacked Elder Paminda, who represents a second angel, which is the rock. And what was it that all that the rock wanted to do? Give water. Give a message. The message of time. This was a mistake that stopped Moses from being allowed entry into Canaan. He failed here. He would later repent, but the consequence became inevitable. I hope we grasp the severity of that. If you aren't benefited by the first angel, you can't be by the second. And when you reject and strike the second, the third becomes of no benefit. So this is one group of people. Red Sea, tarrying. He strikes the rock, and God tells him, you're to pass leadership to another individual. Not someone you've never met before, a close colleague. Elder Jeff to Elder Parminda. Moses to Joshua. Joshua takes over the leadership of Israel. He prepares the people to enter into Canaan, the crossing of the Jordan. They were called out of Egypt to enter into Canaan and take control of the country. They could have done that very quickly. This was not a long process. It was their job. So before they crossed the Jordan, all they've had is internal problems. They have not gone to work. We have not gone to work calling Levites or Nethinims. We have done no work except sort out our own problems. Israel had done no work except sort out their own problems. They began with crossing the Red Sea and then closed with the crossing of the Jordan. So we took these three witnesses from John to Christ, Miller to Snow, Moses to Joshua. In this dispensation, prior to the cross, prior to October 22, prior to the Jordan, the leadership changes. Not to someone that no one knew existed, but to someone who had been involved in the work. We went to the history of Christ and saw that not only did that leadership change, the first messenger died well before the shut door. So that's this history. We went back to this history. Moses. We saw he died well before the shut door. That only leaves us the line of the Millerites. We reminded ourselves that while we have these four key reform lines, some of them have layers. We gave an example of that when we talk about the 30 years of Christ. From 4 BC to 27 AD, these 30 years you can divide into 12 and 18. From his birth to when he's 30. And this is the preparation of a priest. So we take this story that's within the history of the line of Christ, and it's another layer to explain what's happening in our reform line. So 2019 becomes the cross, but also becomes the baptism. Our primary reform line is the whole history, but there are layers. This is not the same thing as cutting out a story. Instead, we're seeing another line. We're not cutting out one story and saying baptism here. Instead, we're seeing a whole new structure that fits from the time of the end. It fits multiple waymarks. And it tells us a particular story based on our theme. This story is the end of ancient Israel. It's going to tell us about the end of modern Israel. This story is about the training of a priest. So it's going to tell us about the training of the priesthood. You have to know your theme. And if there's a different theme, if the verses allow, you can construct a different line. Now people ask, that's 27 AD. Then you have 31 AD. And then you have 34 AD. And they start saying, this is 2019, November. Now add 3.5 years. November 2019. November 2020. That's 1 year. November 2021. November 2022. 6 months. Takes you to 2023. November. December. January. February. March. April. May. May 2023. Lines up with Pentecost. We know 2021 is Paneum, so they'll suggest 3.5 years. May 2023. Sunday law. We should all know why that's wrong. We should all know why that's wrong. Why is this wrong? This is the way numbers become manipulated. It looks good. People like to see these calculations. People get really excited when you do this. Everything FFA currently do is based on this type of manipulation of numbers. Everything they do. We need to understand the methodology of why that's wrong. What is this theme? What is this theme? Christ as a priest. 30 years training for the priesthood. Does a priest have a specific job to do that he's not allowed to do until he's 33 and a half years old? No. They manipulate the line. It becomes numerology. Do we all know what numerology is? Do we all know what astrology is? You have astronomy and astrology. Do we all know the difference? Raise your hand if you don't know the difference. Astronomy will use logic, evidence, science to look at the stars and explain them. This is good. There's nothing odd about astronomy. What does astrology do? It looks at the same stars and it starts to manipulate them, give them meaning, construct inappropriate patterns, and it becomes astrology. Something that deceives people. Something that people like the look of. It's captivating. It captivates you. People like the idea of the stars telling you about yourself and your future. Same stars. Two types of methodology. There is a right way to use numbers, and there is a wrong way to use numbers. We use numbers. We do not use numerology. People in this movement, particularly those who have left, but people are also still here. They like the idea of numbers telling you your future. They place an inappropriate weight on numbers, just as people place an inappropriate degree of trust in stars. There is a right way to use numbers and a wrong way to use numbers. This is a wrong way to use numbers because we start disconnecting it from the story. Whenever we use numbers, they have to be secondary. Numbers come second. Numbers come second. The story comes first. This is the story of the experience of a priest in training and then to go to work. 31 AD, 33 and a half years old, does not relate to our story. So you cannot force the line or the story, manipulate it, and base your evidence on the number. People have done this time and time again. And everyone forgets when Brother Theodore does strange things with numbers, predicts something will happen, and then it doesn't happen. He already has a history of that. Because their evidence is based on this methodology. And people still find it captivating. So you can't extend the training or experience of a priest after when they go to work. Can't construct numbers after that. So this type of methodology becomes numerology. That was a side point. We come back to the miller. We went here to show that how there are different layers. And it's not pulling a story out of a reform line, but creating another line with a specific theme to make a specific point. One theme, end of ancient Israel. This theme, training of the priesthood. Same history. Two themes. Two stories. And the evidence that they are correct is based on the story. Numbers become important. Like the 30 years. Like the 30 years. But only as they support the story. So we come to the Millerites. And what I've said is that you have a few stories. The story of the beginning of modern Israel tells you about the raising up of a messenger, the first leader who rejected the second leader, rejected the message of the midnight cry. And then because he accepts part of it, everyone thinks he's past, and he accepts all of it. But if you are listening to his words carefully, it was clear that he did not accept. He demonstrates that when he writes to Joshua V. Himes on October 6 and says in about 25 years, sorry, 25 days. He cannot, even though it's October 6, he won't give a precise date. It's 16 days. But he does not believe in October 22 that you can have a firm date. So despite his apparent acceptance of part of it, while people thought he accepted the midnight cry, he in fact did not. Tells us the story of this movement. Everyone thought Elder Jeff accepted the midnight cry. They weren't listening closely enough to his words. He did not accept all of the midnight cry. And the part that he was rejecting was the most important part of that message. We'll discuss that message in a moment. But there are different parts of the midnight cry message. And the part that he rejected was the test. Not saying equality. Two streams of information. That teaches equality. He rejected that. And when he split from this movement, he was only saying publicly the rejection of the message that he'd already had from the very beginning. I was a witness to that. Those teachers now associating with him were the same. They all claimed to accept. There was a leading teacher that they have now. I believe he's coming here. The midnight cry message began, was unsealed in 2014. It began with a study of Acts 27. That study was presented early 2017. It was already in the public record. At the very beginning, one of their few leading teachers, now, he approached me in 2017. He'd seen Acts 27, and I'll paraphrase his response. That's a really good study for a child. But you can't honestly believe any of that is accurate. Nice try, little girl. Go back and try again. People think Elder Parminder and I work in secret. That we worked in secret in this time. The reason I worked with Elder Parminder is because most of the leading men in this movement didn't care to hear the thoughts of a little girl. And he was the only one listening. So we did not work in secret. Circumstances, the hand of God arranged that. That's 2016, 2017. I sat with that same teacher. It's one of the ones coming here. August 2019. About 2 days before the split. He started to present, he had been building this study that I'm sure they will teach here about July 18. I told him, there's mistakes in that study. He was asked, do you believe in the midnight cry? Do you believe in the leadership? Do you believe in this movement? He said, I have complete faith and loyalty to the midnight cry. That was maximum 2 days before they left. I knew he was not telling the truth. 2 days later, that was demonstrated. It was one of the chief architects of the study Elder Parminder has been explaining. His evidence that his study on July 18 is correct is that he said the following. Elder Jeff rejected time setting, the message of Parminder. So the leadership rejected the test. So the new leadership, Elder Parminder and myself, we must reject the message as well of the new messengers. So Elder Jeff, the leader, rejected the message of Elder Parminder on time. Therefore, in this history, Elder Parminder and myself, leaders, would reject July 18. My answer to him was the following. Do a reform line and demonstrate that. Joshua does not strike a rock. Christ does not reject a salvational message. His problem, their problem, the problem of everyone who leaves this movement is they refuse to work off reform lines. They take that story, a story that belongs here, in 2012, they're going to cut it and place it here. So now the mistake of Moses becomes the mistake of Joshua. Except Joshua didn't make one. The error of John becomes an error of Christ. Except he didn't make one. It demonstrates key problems with their methodology. They cut stories out of a reform line. Usually the story belongs here. And they try and move it into here. When no reform line demonstrates you can do that. Second problem. They use numerology. They can't use the line or stories. So it becomes built on the addition and subtraction of numbers that look deceptively good. Like May 2023. But it's numerology. It's not how God teaches us. So I brought that up with a point. The rejection has been from the very beginning by all the leading men who are now fighting against this movement. Even when they proclaimed their acceptance of the midnight cry, one day, 2 days before the split, they had rejected from the start. They had already been building up another stream of information, while at the same time they're claiming allegiance to the movement. That's what this story of Miller teaches us. a claim to accept. But then there is a second layer. We went to spiritual gifts, and we read a quote of Ellen White where she said, if Miller would just accept the third angel, he could have accepted the second of Millerite history. He didn't understand October 22. He didn't understand the second angel. If he had have accepted the third, it would have explained to him what he wasn't understanding about the second. But he rejected two angels, not one. Two messages, not one. And then a third story. Elder Parminda, for 18 months, placed this in the public record. 1850 is 2018, the midnight cry. When you study this line, it becomes the story of the introduction of the Sabbath. And it helps explain to us 2012. When a message is presented to the leadership of the movement, and it is rejected. Here it's the Sabbath. Here it's time. 1846, there's new leaders, so the Sabbath becomes accepted. Not by William Miller or anyone else, but by leaders. 2014, new leadership. And if no one else does, some people do. Elder Parminda certainly does. So the leadership of the movement, the new leader, has accepted time before he takes over here. 1848, increase of knowledge on the Sabbath. Ellen White's Sabbath vision. 2016 is our increase of knowledge. When you look at external events, considering revolutions, you can see November 9 and November 9. And then 1850 becomes 2018. It's the formalization. So when it's the Sabbath truth, and you then go back to the experience of the first messenger, he dies before 1850, well before the shut door. So the experience of William Miller you can see in 3 stories. It tells you he rejects the second angel's message. He rejects the third angel's message. And it, just like John, just like Moses, he dies before the shut door. So even Miller is consistent with the other 2 lines. So when people say today, Elder Jeff is the first angel, it's a title that gets picked up, carried for a period of time, and put down again. One person can have multiple roles or symbols attached to them. We are in the time of trouble. There is no first angel. There is no first angel. And all the lines show that we are 6 years past when we should have learnt to follow someone else. All the people that didn't learn in this history to hear and follow Elder Parminda found it impossible to understand the midnight cry. And whenever I presented, you could see on their faces, they could not understand. And the heartache, the pain, was that I knew they were disciples of John. They had never followed Jesus because they were not benefited by the second angel. They could not hear the midnight cry. They could not understand its methodology or the test. So in conclusion, most of this has been revision. The lines show that however you want to define death, Elder Jeff died before November 9 last year. That is laid out in 3 different reform lines. This is literal. This is literal. This is literal. When we take them to the spiritual. So he did not have to literally die. But symbolically, spiritually, he already is. And however hard that is to hear, when these subjects are life and death, when people follow him, they die too. So we have no choice but to point to the lines and speak plainly. Choose you this day who you will serve. The leader who struck the rock, rejected the midnight cry, died. Or the leader God raised up, who taught based on parables, which another way of saying line upon line. Everything that Christ taught is based upon line methodology. So choose which individual uses line upon line. Because it is not the people who use numerology. It's not the people who've left this movement in the last 6 months. If we wait to July to decide which side is true, it's too late for many of us. You know what is true because of the evidence that it is the truth. Not because you think it becomes the better of two options. If your trust is in reform lines, like me, you don't get a choice. You've already been told what is right and what is wrong. And all of us, myself, Elder Parminda, or you, all we're doing is faithfully following what the reform lines teach us. What to believe, how to behave, and what is the nature of the kingdom of God. If you kneel with me, we'll close in prayer. Dear Father in heaven, thank you for these reform lines. Lord, you have given us abundant evidence. I pray, Lord, that we'll have faith in them. We know that they continue to open up, that there are elements that we don't understand, but at each trying time you give us enough to have a firm faith in your leading in this movement. I pray, Lord, that all heads bowed and those that we know and love, our brethren who could not come here, our brethren in Uganda who are struggling with these things, who are confused, that they may see the evidence of the lines and put their faith in them. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.